We've reached the final of the World Cup knockout tournament. We started with 128 players about 3 weeks ago, and now we're down to just two. Ding Liren of China against Levon Aronian, who will play 4 classical matches to decide the champion. Of course, in a sense, this final is something of an anticlimax, because just in guessing here, the two have qualified for the candidates tournament. Nevertheless, there is still a fair amount at stake in this final. And one thing is, we're going to look at it in a very mercenary way, the prize fund, and the winner will receive a net prize of $96,000. The second place player gets $64,000, so a bit of a difference there. And it doesn't look bad to have on your CV World Cup winner 2017. So, yeah, and also, you know, they want to put on a good show for spectators as well. Now, the first game was drawn. Both, well, Ding with black equalised fairly easily, and Aronian played fairly cautiously, and the game ended in a draw. The second game was more interesting. Now, Ding with the white pieces, he played a Catalan. Aronian equalised pretty easily, and after 29 moves, they've reached this endgame. So you can see material is still even. Black has split pawns here. Now, it probably doesn't matter too much about the pawn on e6. Pawn on b7, if that can get going, then black may have some advantage. But really, white should be okay here. I thought the best was to protect this pawn. You could advance it, that's one possibility. But here I think f3 is a very solid move, with a simple idea of bringing the king towards the centre. And I don't think this pawn will represent any danger at all. Should be a draw. But instead Ding played knight to b3, and I think this was just a momentary lapse of concentration, because Aronian played b6, seized his chance. Now, of course, the knight can't move because this knight would be en prise here. So Ding has to take, and now pawn takes knight on a5, gives black a very dangerous passed pawn. You can see that this king is a long way from stopping that pawn advancing. So this is quite dangerous already, and Ding thought for, well, almost 20 minutes over playing bishop c4 just to check what was going on. So somebody very wise said passed pawns should be pushed, a4, the king comes across, and a3 goes again. So this pawn just threatening to go all the way. Aronian not too bothered about this e-pawn if he can push that past a-pawn. So the knight came back to defend. Bishop a4. White can take on e6. It'll actually transpose to the game, so I'll just continue on with the game. Knight c1. So establishing a blockade here. And bishop here, perhaps looking to play bishop in, maybe looking to take that pawn. King across. Yes, now if bishop here, then the king can cross over, and if pawn here, then the knight comes up and the pawn can be stopped. So Aronian just took the pawn here. Check on e6, and the king came across. King attacks the bishop. Bishop retreats. Now if bishop b1, wanting to push that pawn, then the king is just in time to stop that pawn. There you go. The king comes in, and white is fine. So Aronian played knight d5, and this is a clever move because it stops white's king from crossing over to stop that a-pawn. And now that gives black time to bring the king up the board. So king c1, and bishop g6. So you can see that pawn does a very good job of stopping the king coming to b2, and the bishop cuts across as well. So there's a barrier there, and that's important. So that means that white always has to keep one of these minor pieces guarding that pawn. Now in the meantime, black is thinking, can he somehow get through to these pawns on the king side? Knight d4 from Ding. And now a move that he'd underestimated. Aronian played knight c7, and then Ding realised that he was in trouble, stopping the knight coming here, white's knight coming here. Knight came back, and the king advances forward. So very difficult when white's king is so passively placed. So what Ding does is advance his kingside pawns, hoping to try to eliminate black's pawns. My computer thinks that bishop g8 here, and followed by h4, is the best way to get some counterplay. But I mean, in the game, this is incredibly difficult to determine. Ding played g5, which looks reasonable, just a similar idea. Maybe bishop g8, maybe knight h5. But after this is getting quite serious. Bishop returns to this excellent post. And now it looks as though white is getting somewhere, because this pawn will be taken. But actually, black is in control now. Knight comes to this wonderful square on d4, possibly looking to support the a pawn, perhaps looking to get at these pawns here. And now black's king starts to come in. And here Aronian played, I think, a very understandable move, a very practical move. He took the pawn on f3. My computer thinks that knight b3 check is a winning move. I mean, I think this would be incredibly difficult to play in a game. The point is that here, after check, king c3 would be a draw, just knight here. The king and pawn endgame would be a draw. But instead of that, after the check, black should play king b4. And the basic plan is for black's king to cut across to the king side and try and take all these pawns. Now, the bishops and pawn still prevent the white king coming over to attack the pawn. But remarkably, it seems as though the king and the bishop can actually control the knight. It's very, very tricky, and I think this is a real computer suggestion, because I think in a practical game one would somehow doubt that it would be possible for black to control the knight. But I mean, this, let me just give you a taste of this. So bishop f5, you can see how that dominates the knight, and the king just wants to take all these pawns. And after this, here's a tricky moment. King g4 actually draws the computer. Well, let me just show that here, followed by here, and yeah, knight gets back across. Or if a2, then knight e5 check. King a2 followed by taking here. That's a draw. But in this position, black can play king f4. So very subtle. Instead of going for the pawn straight away, the king waits. And the point of this is that in this position, you can see that the king dominates the knight. So the knight has to go to a pawn square, and then the king comes back to take these, and that should be winning. But you know, this is incredibly tricky, and I can understand why Aronian didn't go for that knight b3, but instead went for a practical move and just took on f3. He still has very good winning chances here. Let's see what happened. I mean, my computer in this position thinks that h4 is the best move, giving up the pawn in this way. Impossible to determine during a game. Ding played a normal move, bishop a2. And here, you can see that black's pieces are really dominating. The king dominates the knight, the bishop is still in this superb square, the knight is on a fantastic square, and here Aronian played bishop knight c5. We'll see what happened to that in a second, but a much clearer move is knight c3, hitting the bishop, and now knight e2 check. The king has to move away from the a pawn, and knight g1. So you can see the king and the bishop still dominating the centre of the board, and now the knight just spins round and is ready to pick up this pawn, and the bishop has to look after the a pawn. The knight is just dominated by black's pieces, and I think that's winning. Instead, Aronian played knight c5. Now the bishop endgame is winning, but instead Ding dived away, and if Aronian repeats with knight e4 now, I think he's still okay. Instead he played king e5. So he's looking to bring the king over to take the pawn, which doesn't look like a bad strategy, but actually that knight performs very well indeed. Let's just see how Ding managed to hold the game. And here, yeah, his king manages to get to the a pawn, and although white's king is a long way off, in fact it's very hard for the moment to advance the pawn. I mean, obviously the g pawn can't be advanced at the moment because the bishop is on, and white's king comes back, and well, let me show you something typical here. If the pawn advances, which is really what black needs to do, then you play here attacking the pawn, and if g3, knight e4 check, and you take the pawn. So here black can't really make any progress, and after king d1 they agree to draw. I mean, in order to get this g pawn going, you've got to attack the knight, but when in the meantime the king comes here, the knight can bounce out. Of course, it's a stone cold draw in that case. Well, a couple of wins there, one of them very, very tricky. Knight b3 check, very, very tricky, but I think Aronian will be kicking himself in this position for overlooking knight c3, which I think is, compared to the game, I think is relatively obvious. The problem was that at this time Aronian was playing on his increment. You know, he was down to his final seconds, and after each move he would receive another 30 seconds, but he had to calculate very, very quickly, and here he simply chose the wrong plan. Looks tempting to bring the king over to attack the pawn, but the knight was too tricky. So first two games drawn. That one was very, very difficult. So they still have two more classical games. Of course, if they're drawn, then we go into a tie break. Thanks for watching.